In this video, we're going to take a look at point controls with OpenRoads Designer. A point control is used to override the normal location of one or more points or components in a cross-section. Examples of this could include lane or shoulder widening, staying within the right-of-way, maybe with an end condition, or maintaining a particular ditch profile. And your super elevation points are also controlled with point controls. So in my view here, on our State Route 185 example project, I have my plan, my 3D view, profile, and cross-section already shown. And I got that quickly by right-clicking and holding that down and using the 4 views, plan, profile, cross-section, 3D. So the first thing I want to do is we'll take a look at our template for the project that we have. And I'm going to look at my State Route 185 template. And the first example I'm going to show is how to move or adjust this left outside shoulder point with a point control, or with a horizontal point control. So this point is drawn at 4 feet wide right now. I'm also going to show how to use a vertical point control to modify or define a profile of this ditch using the left EC ditch point. And then on the right side of this corridor with the right ditch, I'm going to show how to use both a vertical and horizontal point control to define the location of this ditch. So no changes are really needed to our template here. So we'll just close this and we'll get started by adjusting the shoulder width first. So with the heads up prompts or the pop-up menu here, I can select on my corridor and I can use the hammer menu, the corridor creation tools, and I can use the create point control command right here, or from the edit command or edit group of my corridor tab, I can go to create point control. So the first thing it's going to do is prompt me to locate my corridor, so I'll select the corridor handlebar there. And for all 3 of these examples, I'm going to use the same start and end station. So from 420 plus 00 to 423 plus 00. And for my first example, I'm going to do the left shoulder. So I'll give it a description so it'll help me find this later when we review the point controls. I'll accept it. And I'll locate a point. So what I can do now is in my plan view, I can select the point that I want. So I could hover over my my edge of shoulder there, and it's showing me that it's the outside shoulder point. Or I could also come over into the dialog box and pick which point I want to use if I know what it is. And, but generally, it's probably going to be easier to go ahead and select it from the plan view. So that's what I'm going to do here. And now I'm going to change my mode to horizontal. I just want to change the width. And my control type is going to be linear for all of these examples. But you can also use feature definition or corridor features to do these. And it's worth noting that depending on which mode you select, you also will get additional control types here. So data point to accept linear. And now I want to locate a plan or my profile element. So I'm just going to select my center line of State Route 185. And I don't want to use it as a secondary alignment. And priority 1 is fine. So now I want to give it my horizontal offset. And this is all based on the center line of State Route 185. So I have a 12-foot lane plus a 4-foot shoulder. I want to add 4 more feet there. So I'm going to give it an offset of -20 feet. Now data point to accept. And now I also need to enter in my stop offset. So you could enter these in as different values if you wanted maybe the lane to taper, or you're opening up a turn lane or something like that. So data point to accept, the corridor processes, and you'll see that the shoulder was widened here. We're also given the little prompt here that shows the point control. This was new to OpenRoads Designer, so we can select on this and we can review some of the properties of this point control. We can make edits here. We can also graphically go ahead and pick this up and move it in data point, and now you'll see that the corridor or the shoulder is adjusted to that new point. So now what I want to do is I want to look at adjusting the left ditch to follow a profile that I need to define. So I'm going to switch over to the geometry base map file for this corridor. And I already have my profile view shown here. So from when I switch to geometry, I'm going to toggle on my Civil AccuDraw, and I'm just going to place a simple profile by PI here. And I'm going to set my feature definition to modeling, template points, miscellaneous. I'm just going to use this do not construct. So in my profile view now, I'm going to start this at 420 plus 00. Okay, something was happening there with my Civil AccuDraw. So when I turn on my Civil AccuDraw, I want to start my first point. I'm going to start with a simple profile by PI, and I want my first point to be at 420 plus 00, and I'm going to give an elevation of 955. And then I'm just going to go ahead and set that. Let's say I want it to end at 423 plus 00, and I need it to be at 2.5% slope. So a data point to accept, and then reset to end it. So I don't need to do anything else with this at this point, other than note the name of this. So the feature name became DNC. I could have renamed it as I was placing it. Probably would advise that you do that so that you can keep track of what geometry aligns with what. So now we'll switch back to our corridor model, and I'll go back to my corridor menu, or select from the plan view. I'll select Create Point Control. I can turn off my Civil AccuDraw. So I'm going to start at 420, end at 423, and I'll give this a name of left ditch. And I'm going to locate my point, so I'm going to pick the inside ditch point here. And in this particular example, I just want this to be a vertical mode, a vertical constraint. And I'll choose linear. And now again, I'm going to choose my center line for my plan element. And now I need to change which profile. I don't want to use the active profile for State Route 185. I want to choose that ditch profile. So if I come to my profile element in my dialog box here, I see the profile for DNC. So that's what I used on that left side. So once I select that, I'll accept through the rest of these prompts. And I do not want any other additional vertical offsets here. So now that we've done that, we'll see the ditch was adjusted to follow the profile that I defined in this view. Okay, so let's take a look now at modifying the right ditch to use both a horizontal and vertical point control. You'll see here I drew in this sort of meandering line to follow that I want my ditch to follow. So let me just jump back to my geometry file and we'll take a look at what I did. Okay, so in the plan view, I just used my horizontal geometry commands to create an alignment that I wanted. Maybe we were trying to move around some other constraints, or we were just trying to make a meandering ditch here, just maybe it fit the topography better. So that's all I did there, and then in the profile view, I created a profile along that element. And what I did in my profile creation, so that I knew where I tied in, I used the profile intersection point, and that defined these pink dots at each end to find where I was tying in to the ditch that was being created in my corridor model. So I knew that way I could tie in exactly. And let's just assume for this example I needed to create a low point here for a catch basin that maybe needed to go across to the other side. Once I did that, then I went ahead and created this, or set this to be my active profile for this alignment. So once that was done, then I can switch back to my corridor file. And I'll go back to my corridor menu, or I can go ahead and just from my plan view select my corridor. And I'll just use the Create Point Controls. I'll start at 420 and end at 423. And I'm going to name this right ditch. I'm going to locate the point that I want to control. So that's my right inside ditch. And when I select that, it's populated in my point dialog box here. Now I want my mode set to both. So data point to accept. And my control is linear. Now I want to locate my plan or my profile element. So rather than select the center line for 185, I'm going to select the horizontal geometry that I've drawn for my ditch line. Now it's going to prompt me to select or accept my active profile for this element. And that is what I want, so I'll accept that. And I don't need to use a secondary alignment. And then I'll data point through the rest of these, and I don't need any additional horizontal offsets here. And I don't need any vertical offsets. So when we do that, you see that my ditch is now adjusted to follow both that geometry horizontally and vertically. Now, let's take a look at the cross-section view. You may have noticed when we started that I had these two pink boxes for these two edge of pavement points. Point controls are represented by these boxes, and before we even started, I already had super elevation applied to this corridor, so the edge of pavement elevations, or edge of pavement points, were being controlled by point controls for the super elevation. As we work through it, we widened the left shoulder here, so now we have a point control on our left shoulder. We also have one for the left ditch line that we moved. For our right ditch line, we also have one here. One thing to point out too is that because we modified both horizontal and vertical, the back slope here is no longer being controlled by the template. So that's going to vary based on the profile of this ditch line here. On the left side, because we only use the point control to do it vertically, the 3:1 slope that was already defined in our template was maintained. So lastly, we can modify all of these as needed. As I showed earlier, we can modify graphically by selecting the point control in the plan view and moving it. When I did the vertical constraints, you'll see that those appeared on the center line. So if I pick this one up should modify the ditch point. Oh, excuse me, because they were on top of each other, it selected the right ditch. So that one was modified when I grabbed that handlebar and edited it. But what you'll see, the difference is the horizontal line or the perpendicular line here is just a horizontal constraint. On the left ditch, where we only had the vertical point control, that just has a diagonal line. Now, when we have our ditch on the right, we see the two diagonal lines create the little crisscross here. So We can modify those graphically, but to modify the start and end. But what if we want to modify some of the values within there? So say we wanted to modify the 4-foot width to maybe make it an additional 6-foot width. So we can do that too. So if we click on the properties for that, we could come in and add 4 more feet here. Could also modify our start and end stations if we wanted to. We can do the same thing for the vertical and the horizontal and vertical point. We can also, when we select on our corridor, we can go to the corridor creation tools and we can choose the corridor objects. And this will bring up this dialog box with all of our components of our corridor shown. You can also get to that from the edit command, and we have the corridor objects icon right here. So now if we come down to the point controls section, you'll see there are 4 super elevation point controls that were already added previously. Now at the bottom you'll see the 3 that we just added. So there's a left shoulder, a left ditch, and a right ditch. And then you can see that the mode for each one of those that we did is shown. And we can make edits at this point if we wanted. We could change the begin range, the end range. We could modify any of these offsets that we needed. We could also change the point or plan and profile elements for any of these as well. There is one other way we can go ahead and review some of these, is from our Explorer when we browse through our corridor and look at the corridor name, and we can go to point controls. And again, the same point controls are listed as were listed in our corridor objects dialog. And when you select on one of them, the properties dialog will bring up the point control information. So one other thing I wanted to point out here is, let me move this one back to 420 plus 00. And notice when I entered that, my new ditch line follows that, but it doesn't follow it exactly. That's because of the feature definition that is assigned to my corridor for the design stage, which is only putting in a template drop you'll see in my 3D view every 25 feet or so. So if we wanted to fix that, we could select our corridor. When we look at the properties, instead of this feature definition being set to conceptual, we can change it to design or final, and we can get even better corridor processing here. But it might take, depending on the size of your corridor and how long it is, it may take longer. So you may want to do some of your preliminary work with conceptual, and then before you're ready, or when you're almost done, go ahead and change it to final. So when we do this, we'll see the number of template drops increase in our 3D view, and then we'll also see in our plan view that follows that alignment much better. So you can see the number of template drops significantly increased here, and it also follows this geometry much nicer.